we see around us. So that's what we're going to start with, the perceptual starting point. What can babies see? Then, once we realize that they can't see very much, and I'll get to that, we'll get past it to the point where they can start seeing things, and then we'll discuss the biases they come into the world with. After that, we're going to talk about learning about emotions, attachment, and things like that. And then we're going to get into cognitive development, which includes memory and language and some theory. We're going to talk about Jean Piaget, one of the giants in the field of psychology, about whom you should all know after today's lecture. And then we're going to finish up talking about puberty, hormones, and adolescence. And then I'll give a quick summary at the end. Okay, so we're going to bounce a bit around the lifespan. This isn't going to be a start-to-finish thing where we go from 0 to 16 and I tell you everything there is to know. Instead, I just want to give you a sampling at different points in the lifespan of how different things are developing. And then, off of that framework, you can go learn about whatever else you'd like to learn about. Okay, so let's get to it. What is it like to be a baby? If you've ever asked yourself this question, I bet an easy answer didn't come to you. Babies are, in a word, non-vocal. Okay? In another word, babies are incomplete. They're not fully baked, not fully cooked yet. And in fact, this is best revealed, I think, in the field of psychology by how the visual system comes into the world. Babies are born nearsighted. That means that you have to be very close to a baby for them to resolve any real detail in your face. That means that and I'm talking very young infants here, 0 to 2 months, okay? And over the first 3 months is when visual acuity improves. But when the baby first comes out, they're not able to see things on the other end of the room very clearly. And in fact, they can't, because they don't have any visual knowledge, they can't figure out which things are objects and which things are shadows. In other words, it's a very difficult thing for an infant to resolve. And over the first 3 months, this changes. At the beginning, very little visual information gets in, and the baby has to rely on little tricks to figure out what's out there in the world. So, for instance, one that's very cool, I think, is that the baby, because its vision is very poor at the beginning, learns who mom is, not by some big view of the face, remembering what color eye she has, or, you know, the structure of the face like you or I might if we were remembering somebody that we just met. Instead, the baby remembers this part of the head. And I just messed my hair up. But that part of the head, the hairline, it's a high contrast region where dark meets light. Okay, and in different people it'll be more or less true. But for people for whom that's true, the baby uses that information to figure out who is who. Okay, so in other words, if we do an experiment with a baby where we try to see if they know who mom is based on a picture, let's say, but we obscure the hairline, babies go to chance in their performance. Let's say if we had a man or a female here and mom here, and you block the hairline, very, very young infants don't look more at mom than the non-mom. So this is just one example. Of course, different babies might come up with different tricks to figure out who's who and what's what in their world. But the general point is that they have to use these tricks because they're kind of blind at the beginning, and especially when it comes to far-off objects, okay? Near objects, they're way better at. Part of this is because the eye isn't fully developed. Part of it is because the structures around the eye aren't developed. Don't focus on that necessarily. Just remember the fact that babies come into the world nearsighted and within the first 3 months have to use little tricks to figure out who's who and what's what. Okay? Now, obviously we don't stay that way. So by 3 months, babies begin to show what we call visual biases. Now, don't get hung up on the word bias. What I don't mean is like they're being, you know, sexist or racist or misogynist, right? What I mean is that their attention systems are designed to prefer looking at certain things over others. And there's obvious reasons for this, right? So, babies are guided by their attentional systems just like adults. And one of the things they are guided to look at a lot is the human face. In fact, it's one of the strongest biases we come into the world with. The human face is a super rich source of information for humans. We are social animals, right? If you're speaking with somebody and you want to know whether they're being sarcastic or being serious, you're going to look at their face to understand that. You're going to look at their face to know who they are, right? You're going to look at their face to know what emotion they're expressing, and so forth. This is a rich source of information. And babies come built with that in their mind and brain system, okay? That bias. And of course, because babies are happy little creatures for the most part, and people are happy to be around babies, most babies learn most about the happy face at first. So humans have 6 basic emotions: happy, sad, fear, anger, disgust, and surprise. All humans experience them. We all show them on our faces to one extent or another. And babies have to learn about those facial expressions. And one way they do this is because they're biased at faces. The statistics of those facial expressions come into the baby, and then over time they realize which faces are happy, which faces are sad, and so forth. Because there's more happy faces, they learn more quickly about that, except in cases, of course, where there's abuse or something like that, where there's more angry faces around. And then experiments show us that these kids actually learn more about anger, say, than they do happy. But most kids, since we're doing normative development today, learn more quickly about happy than the other 5 basic human emotions. Okay. So, short-term memory. You've heard this term, I bet. It's also called working memory. In fact, that's the more modern definition, but I'm using the old classical word to top the slide, just to trigger your memory a little, no pun intended. Basically what this is the capacity to hold things in mind. Okay, so if I gave you a string of 5 numbers and said in 30 seconds I want you to say them back to me, you'd be holding them in your head, wouldn't you? You'd be reciting them in your head. If I gave you an image, you might be trying to picture the image that you have to replicate 30 seconds later. This is called working memory. Okay, what we see is that over the early lifespan, this improves. So from birth through adulthood, we basically have how can I do this? A straight line going up where the capacity to hold things in your head gets greater and greater until it starts to level off. Now, exactly where it levels off, the old trope was that it's 7 plus or minus 2 items for most people. That's what adults can hold in their head. Young kids will hold less and less and less as you go down the age span. At the end of the day, it's just important to note that short-term memory is improving in these kids, okay? And part of that is a function of they have more and more stuff to remember and more knowledge to build off of. And this brings us to one of my favorite topics, language acquisition. We are, among other characterizations, the talking hairless ape. I won't talk about the hairless part today, but I will talk about the talking part today. We are the only species, obviously, that has language with a capital L. So there are other species that communicate with each other. Dolphins have their chattering. Bees have a complicated symbolic dance they do to let bees know where different resources are in the environment. Humans, though, have a much different system. We have basically a system that can generate an infinite number of different phrases. Okay, that's human language with a capital L. And obviously infants don't come pre-packaged with all of language built into them in any real sense. We have to learn words, and an infant born in Sri Lanka will learn different words than the infant born in Papua New Guinea, and those will be different from the kid born in Detroit, right? So how does this happen? Well, let's just lay the problem out at the beginning. 60,000 to 100,000 words is the average vocabulary of the single language speaking adult, monolingual adult, okay? Monolingual meaning one language. 60 to 100,000 words, and we start with 0. If you do the math, that means that starting with their first word, about 9 words a day during development. That's insane, isn't it? 9 words a day. Now, of course, it's not through explicit instruction that these kids are learning these words, is it? We don't sit around with infants and every day drill 9 words into them. It's just passive experience with the statistics of the linguistic world now, not the visual world, that teaches these kids the